Hi, my name's Alex Wright, and this is my book talk about Inventing Ourselves by Sarah Jane Blakemore, The Secret Life of the Teenage Brain. I was really interested to read this book because I am a teenager, and all of my friends are teenagers, and my sister was going to turn a teenager when I picked the book, and now is. So I feel like now I understand maybe the things my friends think, and I think maybe just a little bit more, and I get a better understanding of kind of that stereotype that a lot of people have about teenagers. And yeah, so I'll go more into how I feel about the book later at the end of the book. I mean at the end of my video. And yeah, so throughout the book, the main idea is this risk taking that teenagers do, which is a stereotype that Blakemore got from a man named Stanley Hall, who just says that teenagers are these risk takers that don't think about the actions that they do. And Blakemore kind of throughout the book goes into this idea of why teenagers do risk take, and the the reasons that we do it, and the reasons of how we could maybe stop it, and just kind of I really like the way that she does it. So I divided the video there are three big ideas that kind of go into risk taking that all definitely connect to each other. And that's the one thing that kind of is confusing about the book. It's not a bunch of big ideas. It really just is everything connecting back to this stereotype of risk taking that Stanley Hall has said, and he just he always is constantly talking about it, which I think affected Blakemore. And then this is how she kind of wrote the book. So my first big idea is fitting in. Blakemore says that studies have found that teenagers, Blakemore has found that in a bunch of studies that friends are more important in adolescence than they are in adulthood, and that teenagers are always wanting to fit in. That is something that a lot of people know. I'm sure everyone kind of wants to fit in. There are some people that probably don't, but majority of people definitely want to fit in, and that can be seen in, I think, about every teenage movie ever. And she just goes into further detail that it's important for them to fit in, and they don't want to be excluded. Teenagers are just all about fitting into a certain social group and feeling like they belong. So Blakemore then goes into a study done by Lawrence Steinberg, who she references later, and I will reference later too, in my video. So yeah, so it was a study done by Lawrence Steinberg and his colleagues. There were 306 participants, and the participants consisted of adolescents who were aged 13 to 16, and then young adults who were aged 17 to 24, and then adults who were aged 25 and over. So in the experiment, it was done in a lab, and Steinberg and his colleagues created a video game. And in the experiment, the participants played the video game, which is a car racing game, and they had to drive a car on a track, and not in real life in the video game. And their goal was to finish the track the fastest, get to the end of the finish line. And every so often, there would be these yellow lights, stoplights, and the participants had to make a decision of whether to go through the yellow light or stop and wait for it to turn green again. And if the participants went through the yellow light and made it through without the light turning red, then they would get extra points and would then they would get to the finish line faster because they didn't have to stop. But then if the participants went through the yellow light and it turned red, then they would lose points and lose time. So this was told to the participants. They knew that they were taking these big risks going through the yellow light rather than stopping. And then the participants played the game twice. They did it once when they were alone, and then once when they were with their friends, who were standing there watching. And while their friends were there, their friends were told that they could give the participant advice of whether to go through the yellow light or stop. And the participant was told that they could either follow their friend's advice or ignore it. Overall, there was no significant difference between the participants when they were alone. But when the participants brought in their friends to watch them, when they brought in their friends, the young adolescents were three times more likely to go through a yellow light and take these risks, and young adults were 2 times as likely to take these risks and go through the yellow light. So the findings from the study are that adolescents and young adults are all take the same amount of risk when alone, but when you add in peers and their friends, then adolescents and young adults are more likely to risk take, which is again that's just one more factor of why they do risk take. And it's not really solely them. It's not solely teenagers. It's mostly because their friends are there. That's what the study showed. There was no significant difference when they were alone. So we all have the same amount of risk taking. It just depends on who's with you. So Blakemore discusses this and like kind of like shows a diagram that I thought kind of explained everything pretty well, and she called it a seesaw diagram, and this is what it looks like. And it really is just a diagram of pros and cons. Like why you should do something versus why you shouldn't. Most people write down a list, but she put it in a seesaw. So like if the pros kind of like outweigh it, then it'll go up. But then if the cons outweigh it, you kind of don't want to. And she put this in the book because that's how a lot of people make their decisions, by weighing out the pros and cons. Although we all go through like these social factors, like going like if you're in front of friends and stuff, you would do things differently. Like they weigh in. So as like if I go back to the diagram, like certain things were in the pros and certain things were in the cons. She has like you can like she'll have social on one side and then social on the other. But in an adolescence diagram, the social factors would play a much bigger role and tip that seesaw even more than in adulthood, which I found overall really interesting. So next, my next big idea is she goes into taking risks in hot environments. So this kind of like plays back into fitting in. As I said, all my ideas kind of go back together because she didn't have like three main ideas. So in these hot decisions, she goes into further detail about like how risk taking is done like in these hot situations, and she gives a good example that like helped me understand just a lot more, and that is that like as an adult or maybe even as a teenager, but if you were like drinking alcohol like by yourself, you're much more likely to think of all the negatives and like not the negatives but the reasons you should stop, because like you're just alone and you can like think of more of the negative things and not such the reasons like to keep drinking. But then if you're in a bar with like a bunch of friends who are just like continuing to drink, you would think of more of the positives and like pros, which would weigh your seesaw this way to like keep drinking, and that would be the hot situation because you just like feel like you kind of have to do it. And again, it's going back to this idea that you want to like fit in. So later in the book, she goes into talking about the marshmallow test, which I guess must be a really big thing in a lot of these psychology books, and I'm really glad I read that book because it's definitely helped me like understand. So I think I've talked about the marshmallow test in my previous book talk too, but I read the marshmallow test first, and then I read the talent code, and then I read this book, so definitely has helped me. So in the marshmallow test, a child was set into a room, and a researcher set a marshmallow in front of them and said, you can eat that marshmallow right now, or you can wait until I come back and I'll give you another one. So it kind of shows the delay of gratification, and it can show or like predict how people will behave in the future. And it gets brought up in this book kind of like pretty deeply, like it played a big part. And she says that adolescents are more likely to want like these immediate awards, which may lead to their risky behavior because they're not thinking about the future. They're thinking about like right now. And the longer adolescents could delay gratification, the more positive their life was. Like the better they did on test scores, the better the better their jobs or the better their incomes were. It was things like that. And children with that could like not wait for that second marshmallow, took that like first marshmallow right there, are like more likely to like take these risky behaviors because they're not thinking about the long life risks. And she goes into it talking about like signs, like how people are trying to have teenagers maybe stop smoking on signs like it'll affect you long lasting. Teenagers aren't thinking about long lasting, they're thinking about right now. They're like, they want instant gratification. And I was just like, whoa, it just like really shocked me. A lot of like different parts of this book really made me think. But Blakemore goes in like more depth in saying that the signs that do work are the ones talking about secondhand smoking, because they're then thinking about somebody else and not themselves. So like if they know that like they're smoking with somebody else, then they know that like it means more to that person because it's secondhand. Whereas like by themselves, they're not thinking about the future. Like the signs that say like, oh, in like 25 years, like your lungs will be bad. I don't know the exact signs, but they don't care. They're not thinking about that. And I was it just shocked me. Like I never thought about that when I was reading the marshmallow test. I don't think it brought it up. And I just like that how every book I've gone through, it goes about the marshmallow test even more. And it's just like, it's really interesting. So, yeah. So the children with the higher scores, again, were more likely to have like drug abuse, were more likely to have like tobacco use, alcohol use, stuff like that. So, yeah. Then my third big idea is that we should fix the schools to correlate with those risks. So Blakemore goes like into depth about how certain schools like should start tailoring towards the way the adolescent mind works. And she talks about how the adolescent mind is like malleable, and teenagers should start like taking these risks in school, taking educational risks instead of like these like scarier ones like outside of school, like the drugs and the alcohol and stuff like that. She says that like teenagers should feel the risk to like raise their hand in class for an answer they don't know, or like guess on an exam question, and schools should start like tailoring themselves towards that. She then talks about something which just like completely blew my mind and like really just hooked me until the end of the book. I think it was around page 150. I'm not exactly sure, but like it just hooked me and I finished the rest of the book. And she says that since the adolescent brain is so malleable, meaning that it is changing, like it is not the same, is there like a specific point where where they should be taught a specific subject? Like there might be a prime time to learn algebra. And I was just like, whoa, like I never thought of that. And like that's such a good question, and it really made me think, because I know that like in our school with the IB program, we're ahead. Like I know I took biology freshman year where some people took it sophomore year. Does that like change what we learned? And I know there's like the math classes, like some people are 2-3 years ahead. Does that change how are they doing worse or better than the people that are average, or like 1 year ahead? Is there like a prime time? And I know that like specific schools are like they do different sciences different years. Like I know some people maybe are taking geophysical science like sophomore year or something, while we're taking it freshman year, and it's just like everything's not equal. And I just like, it really made me think about it, and I sat there and I had to think for a long time, thinking like, whoa, I don't know. And I think somebody should definitely like go into researching that or something. And yeah, so that leads me into my connections like to like society. And I think society should definitely like work on that. Like there's definitely some things like we do differently. Like I know Celine like around me is different, and I don't know if that like affects how they learn or something. And I feel like somebody should like go more into depth about that, and that's definitely something like society should look at. Is there certain spots that like people should learn certain things because of the way our brains change? And yeah. So then another thing that really interested me was, again, Lawrence Steinberg, who I said we'd come back to. Here it is. He is an advocate for like teenagers, saying that teenagers should not be like prosecuted as harsh as they are, because their brains are constantly changing. Like their brains are not going to be the same as they are an adult. So definitely maybe as like a 14-year-old, your brain is not going to be the same as when you're an adult, and you might have just changed, maybe not completely, but a lot. And he kind of like he tries to protect adolescents from being prosecuted as harsh as adults, because their brains are going to change. They're not going to be the same. And I feel like we should definitely everybody should think about that. And like I don't think, I'm not like the biggest like advocate for this, but like the death sentence, like what if we're killing somebody at 14 that could be completely different at 20? We don't know. So I feel like that's something like definitely we need to look at, because maybe we're killing people that could have been like really important in life. Like they could have changed a lot, and we just like are not 100% about it. And I really like that like Lawrence Steinberg, is like going into stuff like that, and I think it's really cool. So into like some more quotes. So my first quote is kind of like it's a really positive one, and on page 18, if you guys are wondering, Blakemore says, we do know that adolescence is a formative and protracted period of life during which the sense of self undergoes profound transformation. Younger children do, of course, have a sense of self. A basic one develops very early. But developing an identity is what adolescence is all about. Of course, self-identity is more than just denouncing our tastes with clothes, books, and posters. During adolescence, your sense of who you are, your moral and political beliefs, your music and fashion tastes, what social group you associate with, undergoes profound change. During adolescence, we are inventing ourselves. And I feel like that is just like the biggest quote of the book. Like the book is called Inventing Ourselves. And she just kind of like defines adolescence in a much more positive way than I think Stanley Hall kind of portrayed it. As I said, he's the one that comes up with these stereotypes. And then my other quote is kind of what he thinks about it. And if you guys are wondering, it's on page 201 of the book. And he says, so the quote from her is that Hall famously described adolescence as a period of storm and stress, characterized by uncontrollable and conflicting emotions. Hall talked about the egoism and vanity of this period of life. When energy and exuberance are followed by indifference, lethargy, and melancholy, he saw adolescent behavior as reflecting a combination of uninhibited, childish selflessness and an increasing idealism and virtue. Although many of Hall's stereotypes about this age group have been dismissed as caricatures, he was right to highlight the importance of friendships and peer influence, as well as the urge to explore the world with curiosity and energy and to experience novelty. So I like that she ends the book with his kind of, I wouldn't call them negative, but his negative thoughts about teenagers and like these risk-taking behaviors, his incorrect stereotypes, I guess I would say. And she just kind of like puts them to end, like not puts them to end, but like changes them. Like she's like, no, like yeah, they have energy, but it's like a positive thing, and it's every teenager has them, and they're gonna change, they're gonna grow. And I just like that she ends it with kind of the thing that I think started her thinking about stuff like this. Like I think Stanley Hall kind of like pushed her a little bit. I haven't found that online yet that like he pushed her to make this book, but I think that definitely like played a factor into her trying to think about this a little bit more, and it really interests me. So again, there is like another quote that I kind of wanted to read, and Blakemore talks about this play that these teenagers put on at their high school, and it's about like teenagers and like how their brain works, and there's like this big monologue kind of where it's at the end of the play where the teenagers respond to their parents, like how they think, and I just wanted to read a little bit of it because it really made it just really interested me. So I say to you, my brain isn't broken, it's beautiful. I'm in a city I've never been to, and I see bright lights and new ideas and fear and opportunity and 1,000 million worlds all lit up and flashing. I say, there are so many places to explore, but you've forgotten that they exist because every day you walk the same way with your hands in your pockets and your eyes on the floor. I say, if my brain changed overnight, if it just happened like that, then all I'd have seen is what you have shown me, and all I'd be is a rubbish version of you. I don't want to be a rubbish version of you. I want to be an amazing version of me, I say. When I'm wild and out of control, it's because I'm finding out who I am. What the world is, all the things I want to be. There's a little bit more to the monologue, but that's the part that just caught me. I wasn't really ready for that, and I towards the end of the book, I just got getting hooked even more, and I just kept wanting to finish. And it's just cool saying some teenagers they know they're wild and out of control, but it's just them trying to find out who they are. And I think the same could be said for teenagers in our area. I think a lot of people are kind of acting out and stuff like that, and it's just them trying to find their identity. And again, they're inventing themselves, so I think that's really cool. So overall, I really enjoyed the book. I don't really like that it only focused on risk-taking, just because I feel like teenagers have a lot more. There are many other stereotypes, I feel like. But once you think about it, I do think they all kind of just bundle up into risk-taking. That is what I guess they all do combine into that. But I just wish she went a little bit more in depth into other different topics and maybe just didn't all cluster them into risk-taking, which I don't really know how she would do that. So overall, I do really like the book. I just feel like it is important to have a psychology background in this book, because I did find it a little difficult, even though I am in a psychology class. And I was researching a little bit more just because some of the different parts were a little confusing, and a lot of people said that you definitely do need a psychology background to get the main idea and stuff, or otherwise it's going to be really difficult. So I'd really recommend it to teenagers who are in a psychology class, just so you can kind of understand yourself a little bit more, and definitely adults who have teenagers and wanting to understand why they do stuff like that. I definitely would recommend this to teachers, principals and stuff like that. And yeah, thank you for watching.